The morning Cora Pemberton found her neighbor Martha bleeding on her kitchen floor. She knew her life in Silver City, New Mexico territory, was about to change forever. It was September of 1878, and the sun had barely crested the dusty horizon when Cora heard the children screaming next door. She had run barefoot across the hard, packed earth between their modest wooden homes, her nightdress billowing behind her, and found 6-year-old Samuel and 8-year-old Emma standing frozen in the doorway while their mother labored to bring their new sibling into an unforgiving world weeks too early. Martha's husband had left 3 months prior to work the silver mines up north, promising to return with enough money to secure their future. He had not come back, and Martha had been too proud to ask for help until her body gave her no choice. Cora had helped deliver the baby, a tiny girl who took one shuddering breath before going still in her arms. Martha had wept silently, her face turned to the wall, while Cora wrapped the infant in clean linen and said a quiet prayer. The doctor came an hour later, too late for the baby but in time to save Martha, who would need weeks to recover. When he left, Cora sat with her neighbor and made a promise that seemed simple enough at the time. She would care for Samuel and Emma, walk them to the schoolhouse each morning, and ensure they were fed and safe until Martha could stand on her own 2 feet again. That was how Cora found herself 3 days later with 2 children who were not her own, preparing them for the mile-long walk to the Silver City schoolhouse. At 23 years old, she had never expected to be a spinster caring for someone else's children. She had been engaged once, to a banker's son from back east who had taken one look at the rough territory life and decided his future lay elsewhere. Cora had stayed, partly because she loved the vast New Mexico sky, and partly because she was too stubborn to admit defeat. Samuel had his mother's dark hair and serious eyes. He held Cora's hand tightly as they walked, his small fingers gripping hers with a determination that made her heart ache. Emma walked slightly ahead, her braided hair swinging with each step, trying to appear brave though Cora could see the worry etched in the set of her thin shoulders. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and dust, and the sun painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. They had just passed the livery stable when Cora heard the sound of horse hooves behind them. She turned, instinctively pulling Samuel closer, her free hand reaching for Emma. A tall figure on a chestnut mare approached at an easy trot, and as he drew nearer, Cora recognized him as one of the cowboys from the Patterson ranch that sprawled across the valley east of town. She had seen him before, always from a distance, and had heard the other women in town mention him with a mixture of admiration and wariness that came with any man who worked the rough country. He pulled up beside them, touching the brim of his worn hat. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was serious and respectful. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and his blue eyes held an unusual gentleness for a man who made his living with cattle and horses. "Morning, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried easily in the quiet morning. "Name's Jackson Patterson. I noticed you walking these children yesterday and the day before. It's a long stretch of road and not always safe. I wondered if you might accept an escort." Cora studied him carefully. She knew of the Patterson family, though she had never met any of them personally. They were one of the larger ranching operations in the territory, with a reputation for fair dealing and hard work. Still, she was cautious by nature, particularly when it came to strange men offering assistance. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Patterson," she replied, keeping her voice polite but firm. "But we manage well enough on our own. Jackson nodded slowly as if he had expected that response. "I'm sure you do, miss, but there's been talk of trouble on this road. Some drifters passing through, not the decent kind. I have to ride into town each morning anyway to pick up supplies. It would ease my mind considerably to know you and the children arrived safely." Emma had turned around and was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Samuel pressed closer to Cora's side, and she felt his slight trembling. These children had already lost their father to broken promises and their infant sister to harsh circumstances. They did not need more fear in their lives. "Very well," Cora said after a long moment. "You may ride alongside us if it suits your route, but I'll thank you to keep a respectful distance." "Yes, madam," Jackson said, and there was the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. He dismounted, leading his horse by the reins, and fell into step about 10 feet behind them. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the scuff of boots on packed earth, the jingle of the horse's tack, and the morning songs of desert birds. Cora found herself acutely aware of the man behind them, though she refused to turn around and look. She focused instead on the children, adjusting Emma's bonnet when it slipped and listening to Samuel's quiet questions about whether his mother would be well enough to make johnnycakes when he got home. "She's getting stronger every day," Cora assured him. "Maybe by week's end, she'll be sitting up and wanting to hear all about your arithmetic lessons." "I don't like arithmetic," Samuel confided. "I like the stories better. Miss Hartwell reads to us about knights and dragons." "Knights and dragons in Silver City," Emma said with the superiority of an older sister. "That's silly. There's no such things as dragons anyway." "There could be," Samuel insisted. "In the mountains maybe, where nobody goes." Jackson's voice carried forward, startling them all. "I've been in those mountains many times, and I've never seen a dragon. But I have seen elk as big as horses, and a golden eagle with wings wide enough to cast shade on a grown man. The real world has plenty of wonders without needing dragons." Samuel turned around, his fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such fascinating information. "Really? An eagle that big? Really?" Jackson confirmed, moving up alongside them now that the ice had been broken. "I've seen bears too, and mountain lions, and once a wolf pack that moved across the snow like shadows. This territory is full of wild things, both beautiful and dangerous." "Have you ever been scared?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson considered this seriously. "Many times." "Fear isn't something to be ashamed of. It's what keeps us alert and alive. The trick is not letting it stop you from doing what needs to be done." They had reached the edge of town proper now, where the scattered homesteads gave way to a more concentrated collection of buildings. The schoolhouse sat on a slight rise, a whitewashed structure with a bell tower and a small yard where other children were already gathering. Cora felt a strange reluctance as they approached, though she could not have explained why. She had been walking children to school for only a few days, and yet the routine had already begun to feel like something she would miss when it ended. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Patterson," she said formally as they reached the schoolhouse gate. "It was unnecessary but appreciated nonetheless." "It was my pleasure, miss." He paused, realizing he did not know her name. "Pemberton, Cora Pemberton, Miss Pemberton." He touched his hat again. "I'll be making this ride every morning for the foreseeable future." "Would you object if I continued to walk with you?" Cora should have said no. She should have politely declined and maintained the proper boundaries that unmarried women were expected to keep. Instead, she found herself nodding. "The children seem to enjoy your stories. I suppose it does no harm." Samuel and Emma ran into the schoolyard, joining the other children with the resilience of youth. Cora watched them go, making sure they entered the building safely before turning back to find Jackson still standing there, his horse's reins loose in his hand. "They're good children," he said quietly. "Going through a hard time. You're kind to help their mother. Martha is my neighbor and my friend. It's what anyone would do." "You'd be surprised how few people live up to that, anyone," Jackson replied. He swung back into his saddle with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime around horses. "I'll be here when school lets out this afternoon, in case you're walking them home." "I am," Cora said, then added despite herself, "They finish at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock then." Jackson touched his hat one more time and rode toward the main street, leaving Cora standing alone in the morning sun, wondering what she had just agreed to. The day passed slowly, as it always did when Cora had nothing but her own thoughts for company. She returned to her small house and threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that barely needed it, and baking bread she would share with Martha and the children. Her home was modest, just 3 rooms that had belonged to her parents before they died of fever 5 years ago. She had made it comfortable in her solitary way, with curtains she had sewn herself and a small garden where she grew vegetables and herbs. At 2:30, she prepared a small basket with bread and cheese for the children's walk home, then made her way back to the schoolhouse. She arrived early, as was her habit, and was surprised to find Jackson already there, sitting on his horse in the shade of a cottonwood tree. He had changed his shirt, she noticed, and made some attempt to tame his dark hair, though it still curled rebelliously. "Afternoon, Miss Pemberton," he greeted her, dismounting. "I hope you had a pleasant morning." "Productive," Cora replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "And yours?" "Hot and dusty. I helped my father move cattle from the south pasture. Not the most exciting work, but necessary." He paused, then added, "My mother asked me to extend an invitation to you. She wondered if you might come to Sunday dinner this week. She's always looking to expand our social circle, and she has a particular fondness for welcoming new neighbors." Cora felt a flush of surprise. "I've lived in Silver City for 5 years, Mr. Patterson. I'm hardly new." "No, but you're new to my mother's acquaintance, which amounts to the same thing in her mind. She's quite insistent when she wants to be." There was warmth in his voice when he spoke of his mother, a genuine affection that Cora found unexpectedly appealing. "I'll consider it," she said carefully, though part of her was already imagining what it might be like to sit at a family table again, to hear the gentle chaos of conversation and laughter. The school bell rang, and children began pouring out of the building in a noisy stream. Samuel and Emma found Cora quickly, their faces flushed from the warm classroom. Samuel immediately launched into an excited description of the story Miss Hartwell had read, something about a prince and a quest, while Emma complained about the difficulty of her spelling words. Jackson fell into step beside them as naturally as if he had been doing it for years rather than days. He listened to Samuel's chatter with apparent interest, asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. When Emma mentioned her spelling troubles, he sympathized with stories of his own childhood struggles with reading, which made the girl giggle and forget her frustration. As they walked, Cora found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected. There was something peaceful about the rhythm of their steps, the easy conversation, the way Jackson seemed content to simply be present without demanding anything more. She had spent so long guarding herself against disappointment that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy someone's company. They were perhaps halfway home when they saw the riders. 3 men on horseback, coming from the direction of the main road, riding too fast for the heat of the day. Jackson's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He stepped closer to Cora and the children, his hand moving to rest on the gun at his hip. though he did not draw it. "Walk steady," he said quietly. "Don't run, don't look scared. Just keep walking toward home." Cora's heart hammered in her chest, but she did as he said, keeping her grip firm on Samuel's hand while reaching for Emma. The riders approached, slowing as they drew near. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and dusty, with the hard eyes of those who lived outside the law. Cora recognized the type from the stories that circulated through town, tales of robberies, and worse along the isolated roads. "Afternoon," the leader said, pulling his horse to a stop directly in their path. His smile did not reach his eyes. "That's a fine mare you've got there, Cowboy. Might be we could discuss a trade." "She's not for trade," Jackson replied evenly. "And we'd appreciate it if you'd let us pass. These children need to get home." "Children, is it?" The man's gaze slid to Cora, and she felt the weight of it like something physical and unpleasant. "Pretty woman like you shouldn't be walking these roads. All kinds of dangers out here." "The lady is under my protection," Jackson said, and though his voice remained calm, there was steel beneath it. "As are the children. I suggest you ride on and find your business elsewhere." For a long moment, the tension stretched taut as a wire. Cora could hear Emma's quick breathing, could feel Samuel shaking against her side. She wanted to pull the children close and run, but she trusted Jackson's instruction to remain steady. The leader's eyes flicked from Jackson's gun to his face, measuring and calculating. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him the fight was not worth the potential cost. He laughed, a harsh sound, and jerked his chin at his companions. "No offense intended, Cowboy. We'll be moving along." He spurred his horse forward and the others followed, leaving them in a cloud of dust. Jackson did not relax until the riders had disappeared around a bend in the road. Even then, he kept his hand near his weapon, his eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of their return. "Are they gone?" Emma whispered. "They're gone," Jackson confirmed. "But let's get you home quickly, just to be safe." They walked faster now, and when they reached Martha's house, Cora felt a relief so profound it made her knees weak. She got the children inside and stayed with them while they told their mother about the day, carefully editing out the encounter with the rough men. Martha was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in days, and the sight of her children's animated faces brought color to her pale cheeks. When Cora finally emerged, Jackson was still there, standing in the yard with his horse. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the air had begun to cool with the promise of evening. "Thank you," Cora said, and the words felt inadequate for what he had done. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "I'm glad I was," Jackson replied. "And I'm more determined than ever to make sure you don't walk that road alone, at least until we know those men have moved on from the area. I can't ask you to do that. You have your own work, your own responsibilities. You're not asking, I'm offering." He moved closer, and in the fading light his blue eyes were intense. "Miss Pemberton, I meant what I said to those men. You're under my protection now, whether you asked for it or not. I won't see you or those children come to harm if I can prevent it." Cora's throat tightened with emotion she did not want to examine too closely. She had been taking care of herself for so long that the idea of someone else stepping in felt both foreign and dangerously appealing. "Why?" "You don't know me. We're strangers." "We were strangers," Jackson corrected gently, "but we're not anymore, and sometimes you don't need a reason beyond knowing it's the right thing to do." That night, after she had returned to her own house and prepared a simple supper she barely tasted, Cora lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Her practical mind told her to be cautious, to maintain her independence, to remember that men could be unreliable, and that she had built a life that did not require anyone else's help. But another part of her, a part she had thought long buried, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was all right to let someone in. The next morning, Jackson was waiting at the edge of her property when she emerged with Samuel and Emma. He smiled when he saw them, and Cora found herself smiling back before she could stop herself. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," Cora replied, which was not entirely true but seemed the right thing to say. They fell into their now familiar pattern, walking together as the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm. Jackson told them stories of life on the ranch, painting pictures with his words of cattle drives and wild horses, of spring roundups and winter storms. The children hung on every word, and Cora found herself just as captivated, not only by the stories but by the man telling them. Over the following days, their morning and afternoon walks became the rhythm around which Cora's life organized itself. She learned that Jackson was 26 years old, the second son of Robert Patterson, who had built his ranch from nothing after the war. Jackson's older brother helped run the operation, while Jackson handled the horses and the day-to-day work of managing cattle. He spoke of his family with deep affection, particularly his mother Marion, who had been a schoolteacher back east before following her husband into the wilderness. Cora, in turn, found herself sharing pieces of her own story. She told him about her parents, both born in New Mexico territory when it still belonged to Mexico, and how they had weathered the changes that came with American rule. She spoke of her lost engagement, though she was careful to make it clear she felt no lingering heartache, only relief that she had discovered the man's true nature before binding herself to him permanently. "His loss," Jackson said quietly when she finished. "Any man who couldn't see the strength and grace in you isn't worth your regret." The words, simple as they were, touched something deep in Cora's chest. She was not accustomed to compliments, and certainly not to being seen with such clarity. On Sunday, Cora accepted the invitation to dinner at the Patterson ranch. She dressed in her best gown, a deep green calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and let Martha braid her dark hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple knot. Martha was out of bed now, still weak but recovering steadily, and she had insisted on helping Cora prepare. "He's a good man," Martha said as she worked. "The whole family is well regarded, and the way he looks at you, Cora, it's like you're the only person in the world." "Don't be foolish," Cora protested, but her reflection in the small mirror showed a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm room. Jackson arrived in a wagon rather than on horseback, driving a team of matched grays with skill. He had dressed for the occasion, too, in clean trousers and a shirt that looked new, his dark hair still damp from washing. When he saw Cora, he went very still, and the expression on his face made her heart skip in a way that was both alarming and wonderful. "Miss Pemberton," he said, his voice slightly rough, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," Cora managed, accepting his hand as he helped her into the wagon. The Patterson Ranch lay 5 miles outside town, nestled in a valley where good water and grass created a small paradise in the harsh landscape. The house was larger than Cora had expected, a sprawling structure of adobe and wood that had clearly been expanded over the years as the family grew. Chickens scattered as they drove into the yard, and a pair of dogs came running to greet them with wagging tails and enthusiastic barks. Marion Patterson emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with silver threading through her dark hair and Jackson's same blue eyes. Her smile was genuine and warm as she reached up to take Cora's hands. "Miss Pemberton, I'm so pleased you could join us. Jackson has spoken of little else all week." She shot her son a teasing look that made him clear his throat and suddenly find something fascinating about the wagon wheel that needed his attention. "Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Patterson." "It's very kind of you." "Nonsense. Any friend of Jackson's is welcome at our table. Come inside, come inside. Dinner is nearly ready and I want to hear all about you." The interior of the house was comfortable and lived in, with well-made furniture and bright woven rugs on the wooden floors. Cora met Robert Patterson, a tall man with weathered skin and kind eyes who shook her hand firmly and told her she was welcome anytime. Jackson's brother Thomas was there too, a year older and slightly more serious, with his wife Sarah and their infant daughter. The baby gurgled happily in Sarah's arms, and Cora felt a pang of longing so sharp it nearly took her breath away. Dinner was a lively affair, with conversation flowing as freely as the water in the glasses. Marian had prepared a feast of roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from her garden, and bread so light it seemed to melt on the tongue. The family's easy banter reminded Cora of her own childhood, before fever had stolen her parents and left her alone. She found herself laughing at Robert's dry humor and Marian's affectionate teasing of her sons. After the meal, while the women cleared the dishes despite Cora's protests that she was a guest, Jackson caught her hand and pulled her outside onto the wide porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too vivid to be real. "Your family is wonderful," Cora said softly. "Thank you for sharing them with me." "They like you," Jackson replied, "though I could have told them they would. My mother cornered me in the barn this morning and said I'd be a fool to let you slip away." "Did she now?" Cora felt herself blushing again. "She did." Jackson turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The touch sent warmth up her arms. "Miss Pemberton, Cora, I know we haven't known each other long, just a couple of weeks, but I need you to know that walking with you every morning and afternoon has become the best part of my day. When I'm working, I find myself thinking about what I'll tell you next, what might make you smile. And when those men threatened you on the road, I felt something I've never felt before, a kind of fear that had nothing to do with my own safety and everything to do with yours." Cora's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Jackson, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I'm interested in courting you properly if you'll allow it. I want to know everything about you. I want to make you laugh and keep you safe and maybe, someday, if I'm very fortunate, make you as happy as you make me." The words were simple and honest, with none of the flowery poetry Cora had once imagined she wanted. And yet they moved her more than any sonnet could have. She looked into Jackson's eyes and saw sincerity there, along with hope and vulnerability that matched her own. "I would like that," she whispered. "I would like that very much." Jackson's smile was like the sunrise, bright and full of promise. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made Cora's eyes sting with sudden tears. "Then I'm the luckiest man in the territory," he said. They stood together on the porch as the stars began to appear, talking in low voices about their hopes and dreams, about the future that suddenly seemed filled with possibility. When Jackson finally drove Cora home in the wagon, he walked her to her door and bid her good night with a promise to see her in the morning. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness Cora had never expected to find. Jackson continued to walk with her and the children every day, but now there was a new sweetness to their interactions, a heightened awareness of every touch and glance. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows near his ranch, and she baked him pies that made him close his eyes in appreciation. On Sunday afternoons after church, they would often ride out to a favorite spot of his, a place where a small stream created a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees. There they would sit and talk for hours, learning the details of each other's lives, building the foundation of something that felt solid and real. Martha recovered fully, though she bore the sorrow of her lost daughter with quiet dignity. Her husband finally returned from the mines with empty pockets, and a shame-faced apology that Martha accepted with more grace than he deserved. The children no longer needed Cora to walk them to school, but she continued to do so anyway, unable to give up the morning ritual that had brought Jackson into her life. One October morning, with the air crisp and the aspens turning gold in the mountains, Jackson stopped before they reached the schoolhouse. He had been quieter than usual during the walk, and Cora had noticed the nervous energy in his movements. "Everything all right?" she asked, concerned. "Better than all right," Jackson said. He glanced at Samuel and Emma, who had run ahead to join their friends. Then he took Cora's hand and led her slightly off the road, to a spot where a large boulder provided some privacy from prying eyes. "Cora," he began, and his voice was unsteady in a way she had never heard before. "I planned to wait to court you properly for a year as is decent and right, but I find I can't. I can't spend another day not knowing if you'll agree to spend your life with me. I love you. I've loved you since that first morning when you looked at me with such suspicion and determination to protect those children. I love your strength and your kindness, your laugh and the way you worry your bottom lip when you're thinking hard about something. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a family with you and grow old watching sunsets from our porch. Cora Pemberton, will you marry me?" Cora felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. Joy bubbled up in her chest, so intense it was almost painful. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself she was content with solitude, and now here was this man offering her everything she had secretly longed for. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Jackson, I'll marry you. I love you too. I think I started loving you when you told Samuel about the eagles, when you were so patient and kind with children who weren't your own. I tried not to, tried to protect myself, but you just walked right into my heart and made yourself at home." Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When he finally pulled back enough to see her face, he cupped her cheeks in his work-roughened hands and kissed her with a gentleness that made her knees weak. "We'll do this right," he promised. "A proper wedding with your friends and my family, whatever you want, however you want it." "I just want you," Cora said simply. "Everything else is just details." They were married 6 weeks later on a bright November day when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at it. The ceremony took place in the small church in Silver City, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Martha stood up for Cora, tears streaming down her face as she adjusted her friend's veil. Thomas served as Jackson's best man, and little Emma scattered wildflowers down the aisle with solemn concentration. Cora wore a dress that Marion had helped her sew, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of sage and late-blooming desert flowers. When she walked down the aisle and saw Jackson waiting for her at the altar, his face filled with such love and awe, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her with a joy that made the congregation cheer and applaud. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, beginning their new life together amid a shower of rice and well wishes. The reception was held at the Patterson ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed an army. There was music and dancing, and Cora waltzed with her new husband under the fading afternoon sun, feeling as if she were floating. Robert Patterson gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, and Marion welcomed Cora officially into the family with a tight embrace that felt like coming home. As the evening drew to a close and the stars emerged overhead, Jackson led Cora to the small house he had built for them on the edge of his family's property. It was not large, just 4 rooms, but he had crafted every board with care, thinking of her with each hammer strike. Inside, there was furniture he had made himself and curtains Marion had sewn, and a bed covered in a quilt that Sarah had pieced together as a wedding gift. "Welcome home, Mrs. Patterson," Jackson said softly, lifting her over the threshold. Cora wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. "Home," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." Their first year of marriage was everything Cora had dreamed of and more. Jackson proved to be a thoughtful and passionate husband, attentive to her needs and generous with his affection. They fell into an easy rhythm of work and companionship, with Cora managing their household and helping Marion with the ranch accounts, while Jackson worked alongside his father and brother. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, talking about their day and making plans for the future. Cora continued to walk the neighbor children to school occasionally, though Martha's husband had finally found steady work at the general store and was home to help with such tasks. Still, Emma and Samuel often stopped by to visit, drawn by Cora's warm presence and Jackson's endless supply of stories. The connection forged during those difficult weeks remained strong, and the children became like family. By the following spring, Cora discovered she was pregnant. She told Jackson one evening after supper, watching his face carefully as she delivered the news. For a moment, he simply stared at her, and then he let out a whoop of joy so loud it startled the chickens. He picked her up and spun her around, kissing her face all over until she was laughing and crying at the same time. "We're going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Cora assured him, cupping his face in her hands. "Just like you're a wonderful husband." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat made Cora uncomfortable in her final months. Jackson hovered like a worried mother hen, insisting she rest more than she worked and bringing her cold water and whatever foods she craved. Marion visited often, sharing wisdom from her own pregnancies and helping prepare clothes and blankets for the baby. In late September of 1879, almost exactly a year after that first morning walk that had changed everything, Cora went into labor. It was a long night, with Jackson pacing the floor outside their bedroom while Marion and the midwife attended to Cora. When dawn broke and they finally heard the lusty cry of a newborn, Jackson nearly broke the door down in his hurry to get inside. Cora lay exhausted but glowing in the bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in Sarah's quilt. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Jackson approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the tiny red face of his child, at the small fists waving in the air, and tears streamed unashamedly down his cheeks. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're both perfect." They named him James, after Jackson's grandfather, and he proved to be a healthy, happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Jackson took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything, helping with night feedings and diaper changes, despite the teasing of his brother. Cora would often wake in the middle of the night to find Jackson standing over the cradle, just watching their son sleep with an expression of such love it made her heart ache. Life on the ranch settled into a new normal. James grew quickly, hitting each milestone with determined enthusiasm. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the house, getting into everything and making his parents laugh with his antics. Martha and her family moved to town when her husband got promoted to manager of the general store, and though they saw each other less frequently, the friendship remained strong. 2 years after James was born, Cora gave birth to twin girls, Mary and Catherine. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, but both babies were healthy despite their early arrival. Jackson had nearly lost his mind with worry during the labor, and when the midwife finally emerged to tell him he had 2 daughters, he had to sit down before his knees gave out. "Twins," he kept repeating. "We have twins." "We have 3 children," Cora corrected, exhausted but happy as she nursed the babies. "Our family is growing." The house became louder and more chaotic, full of the sounds of children playing and crying and laughing. Jackson expanded their home, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. He also built a bigger barn and bought more horses, building a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory. Cora managed their growing household with capable efficiency, though there were days when she fell into bed exhausted, wondering how she had ended up with such a full life. But then Jackson would wrap his arms around her, and she would feel the solid strength of him, and remember that morning walk when a cowboy on a chestnut mare had offered his protection and ended up claiming her heart. The children grew, and life moved forward in the way it does. James proved to have his father's way with horses, spending every free moment in the barn or riding across the pastures. Mary was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor play, while Catherine was pure mischief, always into something and utterly fearless. Jackson and Cora navigated the challenges of parenting with humor and patience, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the victories together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Cora back to the spot by the stream where they had spent so many Sunday afternoons during their courtship. The children were with Marion for the day, giving them rare time alone. They sat on the same rock they had occupied years before, their hands intertwined, and watched the water flow past. "You remember when I first asked to walk with you?" Jackson said quietly. "You looked at me like I might be planning to rob you." Cora laughed. "I was protecting those children. And myself, if I'm honest. I had convinced myself I was fine alone. And now I can't imagine life without you, without all of this, the noise and the chaos and the absolute fullness of it. You didn't just walk into my heart, Jackson Patterson. You expanded it. Made room for more love than I knew I was capable of feeling." Jackson kissed her softly, a kiss that held 5 years of shared mornings and whispered conversations, of laughter and tears and everything in between. "I love you, Cora, more today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "That's terribly romantic for a cowboy," Cora teased, but her eyes were bright with emotion. "I learned from the best," he replied, pulling her close. As the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm, they talked about their children, about the ranch, about the future that stretched ahead of them. Jackson mentioned that his father was thinking about retirement, about turning more of the ranch operations over to him and Thomas. Cora shared her dream of maybe starting a small school, teaching children who lived too far from town to attend regular classes. "Whatever you want to do, I'll support you," Jackson promised, "just like you've supported me in everything." They returned home as the afternoon shadows lengthened, to find their children running to meet them with the energy of youth. James had found a bird's nest and wanted to show his father, while the girls had picked flowers for their mother, wilted but offered with such love that Cora pressed them to her chest like precious gems. That evening, after the children were bathed and storied and tucked into bed, Jackson and Cora sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The stars emerged one by one, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Jackson's arm was around Cora's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling utterly content. You ever think about that morning, she asked, when you first rode up beside us? All the time, Jackson admitted. I almost didn't. I was running late that day, and I thought about just riding straight to town. But something made me take the long way, and there you were, walking those children with such determination. I knew right then, even though I didn't understand it yet, that my life was about to change. Mine too, Cora said softly. I spent so long building walls to protect myself, and you just walked right through them like they weren't even there. Best decision I ever made, Jackson said, pressing a kiss to her temple. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as they always do. Robert Patterson died peacefully in his sleep when James was 10, and they mourned the loss of a good man and wonderful grandfather. Marion moved into the main house with Thomas and his growing family, while Jackson and Cora took on more responsibility for running the ranch. It was hard work, but satisfying, and they faced each challenge together. James grew into a fine young man, responsible and kind, with his father's skill with horses and his mother's quick mind. He took over much of the horse training operation, freeing Jackson to focus on the cattle side of the business. Mary became a teacher, just as Cora had dreamed of doing, opening a small school on the ranch for children from surrounding homesteads. Catherine married a young lawyer from town and moved to Santa Fe, writing long letters home that made her parents both laugh and cry. Samuel and Emma, the children Cora had walked to school all those years ago, grew up well despite the difficulties of their early years. Samuel became a blacksmith, taking over the forge in Silver City, while Emma married a rancher from the next valley. They both maintained close relationships with the Pattersons, always crediting Cora's kindness during their mother's illness as a turning point in their lives. On a warm morning in the spring of 1895, Cora sat on her porch watching her grandchildren play in the yard. James had married a sweet girl from town, and they had 3 children who visited the ranch often. Catherine had 2 sons who made the journey from Santa Fe every summer. Mary remained unmarried, devoted to her students, but spoke often of a widowed rancher who attended her church, and who she thought might be worth considering. Jackson emerged from the barn, moving a bit slower than he once had but still strong and capable at 43. Silver threaded his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But to Cora, he was as handsome as the day he had first ridden up beside her with an offer of protection. He climbed the porch steps and settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand as naturally as breathing. They had been married 17 years now, and the love between them had only deepened with time, weathering storms and celebrations alike. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "That morning," Cora said, "when you first walked with us. How different my life would be if you had ridden past, if I had refused your company and held tight to my stubbornness." "You would have been fine," Jackson said loyally. "You've always been strong enough to stand on your own." "Maybe," Cora allowed, "but I wouldn't have been happy, not like this. Not full to overflowing with love and family and life. You gave me all of this, Jackson. You and those morning walks." "We gave it to each other," Jackson corrected. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, watching their grandchildren play. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Every morning, every afternoon, every moment in between. You're still the best part of my day, Cora Patterson. And you're mine," she whispered. As the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm, they sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts full. The children they had walked to school were grown now, with children of their own. The neighbor who had needed help had recovered and built a good life. And 2 people who had been strangers had found in each other everything they never knew they needed: The morning walks had ended long ago, but what they had begun continued still, growing stronger with each passing day. A cowboy had offered protection and found love. A woman guarding her heart had let down her walls and discovered joy. And in the wild, unforgiving beauty of New Mexico territory, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love and family and choosing again and again to walk through life together. On autumn evenings when the air turned crisp and the aspens blazed gold against the blue sky, Cora and Jackson would sometimes walk down the old road toward town, retracing the path they had taken so many times in those early days. They would hold hands and remember, sharing stories the way old couples do, finishing each other's sentences and laughing at memories only they shared. Sometimes they would encounter parents walking their own children to school, and Jackson would tip his hat in greeting while Cora smiled. Those parents had no idea they were passing a legend of sorts, the cowboy who had offered his protection to a woman and her neighbor's children, and ended up finding the love of his life. But legends didn't matter to Jackson and Cora. What mattered was the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had grown from a simple morning walk into something vast and enduring. They had raised good children who were now raising good children of their own. They had worked hard and built a successful ranch that would provide for generations. They had weathered loss and celebrated victories, always together, always supporting each other. As they grew older, their love only deepened. Jackson's hair turned fully silver, and Cora's dark locks acquired threads of white. Their hands became weathered with age, but they still fit together perfectly. Their steps slowed, but they still walked together every morning, around their property if no longer all the way to town. Their children worried about them, as adult children do, suggesting they might consider moving in with one of them, taking it easier, slowing down even more. But Jackson and Cora refused, treasuring their independence and the home they had built together. They had started their life in that house, had raised their children there, and they intended to end their days there too. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration that filled the house and spilled out into the yard. 3 generations of Pattersons, connected by blood and love, sharing food and stories and laughter. James gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, speaking of his parents' love as the foundation on which all of them had built their lives. Mary read a poem she had written, and Catherine traveled all the way from Santa Fe with her family to be present. As the sun set and the party continued, Jackson pulled Cora aside to the spot where he had first proposed all those years ago. 25 years, he said softly. And it still doesn't feel like enough time. I want 25 more and 25 after that. Greedy, Cora teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. Though I want the same thing. Every morning I wake up next to you feels like a gift. Do you remember what you said that day I proposed? That I had walked right into your heart. I remember everything, Cora said. You walked into mine too, Jackson told her. That very first morning when you looked at me with such fierce protectiveness for those children. I thought I was offering to protect you, but really, you were protecting me too. From a life half lived, from never knowing what it meant to truly love someone. They kissed as the stars emerged overhead, a kiss that held 25 years of shared life and promised however many more they would be granted. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that come with age. Marion passed away peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and they laid her to rest beside Robert on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Thomas took over full operation of the ranch, while Jackson transitioned into an advisory role, spending more time with the horses he loved and the grandchildren who adored him. Cora's school dream finally came to fruition, though not in the way she had originally imagined. Mary's small school grew and prospered, and Cora spent her days there as a volunteer, reading to the younger children and teaching them the history of the territory she had witnessed firsthand. The children loved her stories, especially the one about the cowboy who had walked with a woman and her neighbor's children and found true love on a morning in early spring, when Cora was 63 and Jackson 66. They took their usual morning walk around the property. The sun was bright, the air was fresh, and the world felt full of possibility despite their advanced years. They walked hand in hand, moving slowly but steadily, comfortable in their silence. "I love you," Jackson said suddenly, stopping to look at her. "I know I say it often, but I need you to know. Every single day I love you more. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Cora Patterson." "And you to me," Cora replied, her heart full. "From that very first morning, though I was too stubborn to admit it right away. You changed everything, Jackson, made everything better." They stood together in the morning light, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded every dream. The house behind them held memories of children growing up, of holidays and ordinary days, of laughter and tears, and all the moments that make a life. The land around them represented their hard work and shared vision. And the love between them was as strong as it had ever been, tested by time and found unshakable. Their story had begun simply, with a woman walking children to school and a cowboy offering protection. But it had become something far greater, a testament to the power of choosing love, of opening one's heart to possibility, of building a life together one morning walk at a time. As they continued their walk, Jackson told Cora about a new foal born overnight, a filly with legs too long for her body, and a curious spirit that reminded him of Catherine as a child. Cora shared news from Mary's school and mentioned that James was considering breeding a new line of horses specifically for mountain work. They talked about their grandchildren, about the ranch's future, about everything and nothing. When they finally returned to the house, their children and grandchildren were arriving for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had continued without fail for decades. The house filled with noise and warmth, with children running and adults talking and the smell of good food cooking. Jackson and Cora sat in their favorite chairs, watching the chaos with deep satisfaction. This was their legacy, not just the successful ranch or the respected name, but this love that had expanded to encompass so many. It had started with two people and two borrowed children on a dusty road in New Mexico territory, and it had grown into something vast and beautiful. As evening approached and families began to depart, promising to return next week, Jackson and Cora found themselves alone again on their porch. The stars emerged, bright and countless, and the night air carried the scent of sage and possibility. "Another good day," Jackson said contentedly. "They're all good days," Cora replied, "as long as I'm with you." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had done for so many years, watching the stars and counting their blessings. The woman who had once walked alone was alone no more. The cowboy who had offered protection had received far more than he gave. And the love that had begun on a simple morning walk had proven strong enough to last a lifetime. In the distance, a coyote howled, and somewhere a horse whinnied in response. The land was wild still, would always be wild in its heart, but they had carved out their place in it. They had built something lasting and true, something that would continue long after they were gone. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about how they had met, the family would tell the story of the morning walks, of the cowboy and the woman and the neighbor's children who needed protecting. They would speak of true love found in unexpected places, of the courage it takes to open one's heart, of the rewards that come from choosing kindness and connection. But on that spring evening, with the stars bright overhead and their hands intertwined, Jackson and Cora simply sat together, grateful for every morning walk that had brought them to this moment, for every day they had been granted together, for the love that had walked into their hearts and made its home there, permanent and true, forever and always.